I want to say good morning again and thank you all for being here. I think you all know why we're here. For 5 years now, California legislators have been working to crack down on the proliferation of cell phones in our prisons. In that time, a few things have happened that are worthy of note. First, President Obama has signed into law a federal law that cracks down on the proliferation of cell phones in our federal prisons. In that time as well, 43 other states have moved forward with laws focusing on cell phones in our prisons and the threat that they present. So clearly other states, as well as our federal government, are taking this problem very seriously and they're cracking down hard. In the meantime, California has remained stuck. Yet nowhere in the country is a problem worse than right here in California. You will see in the headlines on the posters behind me that the problem is certainly not new to California, and in fact, it's been escalating at an alarming rate. In 2006, the first year our Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation began keeping statistics, there were 261 cell phones confiscated in our prison system. Last year, the year 2010, the number was well over 10,000. And despite the fact that it is a bigger problem here in California than any other state in the nation, we still don't have a law on the books here in California. But it certainly has not been for a lack of effort. Last year, the legislature placed a bill on the desk of former Governor Schwarzenegger that would have made smuggling a cell phone into a California prison a crime with a hefty fine. And he promptly vetoed it. And as a result, the problem continues and continues to grow. But we're here today because there's new hope. With the new governor, there's renewed optimism that this will be the year that we finally get something done in California. As we all know, Governor Brown previously served as Attorney General. And as the Attorney General, he gained a special appreciation for this problem. He understands it and he gets it, as do most Californians who think that cell phones in the hands of our prisoners is a bad thing, and that's just common sense. A cell phone in the hands of a dangerous inmate is a clear and present threat to public safety. And now's the time to finally make smuggling and possession of cell phones in prison a crime. Let me introduce the folks who are gathered here today, some of whom will speak, but I'm proud to be joined by a couple of my colleagues in support of SB 26, beginning with Senator Jean Fuller from Bakersfield. She's a co-author of SB 26, as is Senator Joel Anderson. We have with us today Nancy O'Malley, District Attorney from Alameda County. We are joined by the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, the California Coalition Against Sexual Violence, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, Sheriff of Sacramento County, Scott Jones, San Joaquin County Sheriff Steve Moore, the California District Attorneys Association, the California Peace Officers Association, and many more, including representatives of victims' families. For me, this issue began when I read a story about what happened in Brazil in the year 2006. In 2006, in Sao Paulo, a prison gang used cell phones to organize simultaneous rights in 73 prisons. Those inmates went on to direct street gangs to carry out coordinated attacks in Sao Paulo police officers in the streets. Prison inmates effectively shut down the financial capital of Brazil for days. It was later learned that gang leaders in each of the Sao Paulo prisons had regular conference calls to coordinate these attacks. I started asking our prison officials here in California, could what happened in Sao Paulo, as I read it and understand it, happen here in California? And the department confirmed that, as in Brazil, California inmates indeed are using cell phones to communicate with other inmates both in the same institution and in other prisons in California, as well as to coordinate criminal activities in communities throughout the state. What excellent example. This past fall, when he was still Attorney General Brown announced the arrest of 4 leaders of a notorious prison gang and 30 of that prison gang's members. Several of those arrested were alleged to have been given orders to commit murder and other violent crimes by the imprisoned gang leaders who were sending them messages via cell phones. These inmates are supposed to be out of circulation, but with the cell phone, they're able to maintain their control of street gangs. SB 26 will sever the tie, sever the connection between imprisoned criminals and the street gangs that they control. We don't just suspect, we know that cell phones are being used by inmates to commit all sorts of crimes, to intimidate witnesses, to terrorize rape victims, to plan escapes from prison, to coordinate attacks on guards. The list goes on and on. And in the headlines behind me and in these photos, you'll see the examples of the lengths to which smugglers will go to get a cell phone into a prison and in the hands of a dangerous prisoner. On the table in front of me, there's about 300 cell phones. 5 years ago, it took a year to confiscate this number of cell phones throughout the state of California. Today, the Department of Corrections confiscates this number of cell phones in a week. The problem is growing and it's out of control. This has to be the year. The problem is clearly defined. There is a consensus about a solution, and there's an unprecedented coalition supportive of the solution. It includes corrections officials, guards, sheriffs, peace officers, district attorneys, and advocates for crime, domestic violence, and sexual assault victims. The bill before us is straightforward, and it's tough enough to make both the smugglers and inmates think twice. SB 26 would make smuggling by anyone a misdemeanor punishable by 6 months in jail and a $5,000 fine per device. SB 26 means an inmate caught in possession of a cell phone would face up to 6 months loss of their permanent time credit, and an inmate caught using that cell phone to facilitate a crime would face an additional 2, 3, or 5 years in jail. The bill cracks down on both the smuggler and the inmate who possesses a cell phone. Doing nothing is no longer an option. Cell phones in the hands of prisoners result in real crimes in real time in our communities. I now invite my colleague, Senator Jean Fuller, to say a few words. As I mentioned, she represents the Bakersfield area and is a co-author of SB 26, and she graciously agreed to attend today and express her support for this bipartisan measure. Senator Fuller.
I am very honored to be here with my colleague, Senator Padilla. This is a very important bill, and I'm very pleased that he is taking this forward. I am pleased to co-author this legislation because it will keep cell phones out of California prisons, which create a serious threat to the safety of correctional officers, other inmates, the general public, and especially the victims of crime. More and more victims are continuing to face harassment after their offender has been jailed. I don't know if you can imagine the terror that it would be for a young woman and her family to be in their home and hear someone call them repeatedly and say they are in the house and they are waiting, and a description of the crime that has already terrorized and destroyed their life. Women and minors who have suffered from domestic violence and sexual abuse are continuing to be victimized and threatened in unimaginable ways. This legislation is an important step to address the problem of continuing victimization by cutting off the supply of cell phones. And I totally support Senator Padilla and congratulate him for this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fuller. Now invite Senator Anderson to come say a few words. His support is particularly important as Vice Chair of the Senate Public Safety Committee.
Thank you. As Vice Chair of Public Safety, I'm proud to co-author this bill. And today we're simply saying, smuggle a cell phone, go to jail. It's just that clear. We know this is a problem, and we're solving it. And I thank Senator Padilla for stepping up so strong on such an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. I now introduce the Alameda County District Attorney, Nancy O'Malley, who can speak from the perspective of a district attorney and how inmates are using cell phones to harass their victims.
Thank you, Senator, very much. I'm very proud to be here. In 1996, I tried a case that involved a very violent, brutal gang rape of a 15-year-old girl by 4 men. At the conclusion of the trial, and of course that young woman did not want to come in and talk about what happened to her, especially having to talk in front of the 4 men that had actually attacked her, raped her, sodomized her, and committed serious injuries against her. But she did come in and testify. And one of the defendants was sentenced to 90 years in prison. 10 years later, and this is in 2008, 12 years later, she received a phone call one night, and it was the perpetrator, the man who had orchestrated the gang rape against her. And he started talking to her about, as Senator Fuller said, talking about the crime, reminding her of the things they had done to her, telling her that they were going to come and visit her because she had testified against him in court. She passed out from fear. Luckily, there was someone in her house who called me immediately, and all we thought was, how is this guy out of prison when he got sentenced to so many years? And what we found out was that he was making phone calls from prison with one of these cell phones that has been since confiscated by the Department of Corrections. And to our horror, there was nothing we could do about that. We couldn't prosecute him. We couldn't punish him. We couldn't investigate who had actually given him the device so that he was able to use it in prison. That led to our investigation of finding out what else was going on. And what we found out was terrifying and should terrify all of you. And that is that, as Senator Padilla said, there are gang members who are calling shots from prison through the phone. We found that there were judges' home addresses that were being searched on Google and other internet sites. We found that there were communications that were going on of threatening witnesses, other witnesses. And what we learned was that on the average, there are at least 1,500 cell phones going around during a day. To find out there was nothing we could do to stop prisoners from terrorizing their victims or to stop prisoners from committing gang crimes from prison, to find out there was nothing we could do to prevent judges from being threatened or prosecutors or defense attorneys or other law enforcement personnel is unacceptable. So we thank Senator Padilla, Senator Fuller, Senator Anderson for leading this charge. We support this legislation wholeheartedly, and we will be inside urging the Public Safety Committee to pass this legislation on. Thank you.
Thank you. Before opening up to questions, I want to invite, excuse me just a second here, Karen Carrizosa, want to come forward, who, just an example from a victim's perspective of what inmates are doing with cell phones. She recently received the disturbing news that the man convicted of murdering her husband was caught using a cell phone and had gone so far as to set up a Facebook site. She's here today in support of SB 26, and I invite her to come say a few words.
Good morning. Yes, it terrified me. It was like around, I think it was around New Year's, and we were watching the news, and here's this guy that killed my husband. On the TV, he had got a hold of a cell phone, and he was on Facebook, and that just traumatized me and my family all over again. It's been 11 years, but it still traumatized me and my family. So it's very important that this bill passes, because when I called the prison, they didn't really care. You know, it's no big deal, but it is a big deal to us victims because it has a big effect on us. So I'm going to also help the senator and my family in encouraging people to vote for that bill to pass, because it's very important. And I thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for being here and for your courage. We'll now open up to questions before inviting everybody to join me in committee. The two-part question. First, we've tried. I've tried repeatedly to make the possession, the smuggling of a cell phone into prisons a felony. Unfortunately, it's been met with more than just a little bit resistance by a lot of my colleagues in the legislature out of their concern for the overcrowded situation in our prisons. That's why I couldn't even get a bill to the governor's desk the first few years. Last year, we made the crime a misdemeanor together with a hefty penalty, figuring that's going to be a significant enough deterrent as well. That's what finally reached the governor's desk. So as you can see, I was caught between this legislature who wouldn't support the creation of a new felony and a governor who wouldn't sign a bill that was anything less than the creation of a new felony. And in the meantime, the problem continues to escalate. So in my heart of hearts, it would be a felony, but I'd rather get something done and get a law on the books. That is tough. I believe this is tough. And so that's why we're proposing what we're proposing today. As far as the distinction between employees versus non-employees, again, being as tough enough as we can, but the collective bargaining process in California is in place, and I have to respect that. So we've got to work through that. No, what I'm saying is that there's some changes that can be legislated, there's other changes that cannot be legislated, so we're doing everything that can be. Yes? No. There's penalties in there for employees of correctional offices. Well, again, the creation of a new felony, whether it's an employee or not, is something that the legislature has not supported, as much as I would want them to support it. Well, because after the first offense, they shouldn't be an employee anymore, so they're not an employee when it comes to the second offense. No, I assume they will. Yes. Well, the shocking news last fall that even Charles Manson had access to his cell phone and was caught not just once but twice, to me is a demonstration of just how out of control the problem is. We can give you the numbers of how many have been confiscated each year, and we have. But when California's most notorious inmate has a cell phone and is texting and in communication, we know the problem is out of control. We need to do something about it. If there's no further questions, again, I invite you all to join me in the Public Safety Committee, where this bill is a special agenda item at 10:15. It will be taken up at 10:15 promptly. We invite you to join us. Thank you for being here.